did you come to write Some Folks Say?
Well, you know, back in the 80s and the 90s, I was a volunteer at Harlem Hospital with the HIV pediatric kids.
Mm.
And so one day, I was talking to the chief psychologist on the telephone, and he was on his way over to the ICU to see one of our teenagers there, and he wanted to take him something to read. But he was hard-pressed to find an appropriate thing to read to a 13-year-old inner-city kid about
Yeah.
death. So he just said, you know, someday I'm going to write a book of stories from around the world about how people die. And as he said that, something inside of me just exploded. And I heard myself saying, oh, Michael, I want to help you with that project. That's how
Wow.
it started.
So the explosion ended up with Some
this.
Folks Say and all the researching.
Right.
But is this a book for children?
Well, not really. Although there are stories in it, some of the stories in it have wonderful demons and giants and adventures that kids love, and danger and suspense. But it's really, they're folk tales from around the world and throughout time. So it's really a book for anyone.
Okay. Yeah, and then how did you choose the stories that you compiled into Some Folks Say?
Well, I thought about addressing some of the questions that people have about death and what happens after death. And so I looked for stories that would help people open up their imagination and go further into the subject and be able to explore a little bit more.
And what are some of the other questions that people ask about death? I mean,
Well, they
it's
ask,
really a lot.
one question people ask is, forever they've been asking, why death? Why do
Yeah.
people have to die? So there's a story actually about that it comes from the people that are around today, still around today, the people in Taos, New Mexico.
Mhm.
And it goes like this. It's a poem, really. I have killed the deer. I have crushed the grasshopper and the plants he feeds upon. I have cut through the heart of trees growing old and straight. I have taken fish from water and birds from the sky. In my life I have needed death so that my life could be. When I die, I must give life to what has nourished me. The earth receives my body and gives it to the plants and to the caterpillars and to the birds and the coyotes, each in its own turn, so that the circle of life is never broken.
That's great, because that could be a human, or I mean, all creatures
That's
combined.
right.
That's wonderful. But why do you think that most people are so afraid to talk about death?
Well, I think it has to do with not knowing what's going to happen after this life. There are many stories in the world, and there are few in this collection about wonderful tales about the afterlife, adventures of all kinds. But there's a little story that the Hottentot people tell. The Hottentots are from southern Africa, very ancient people, cousins to the Bushmen. And they have a story that goes like this. One day the moon sent an insect to men to say, go and tell them that as I die and dying live, so shall you also die and dying live. So the insect started off on his way. But he was overtaken by the hare, who said, where are you going? The insect said, oh, I have been sent by the moon with a message to men to tell them that as she dies and dying lives, so shall they also die and dying live. Well, the hare said, you're a slow and awkward runner. Let me go. So off he went, and when he got to the place where men lived, he said, I have been sent by the moon to tell you that as I die and wholly perish, so shall you also die and come to an end. With that, he went back to the moon and told her what he had said to the people. The moon was angry and scolded him and said, how dare you say a thing which I have not said? With that, she picked up a stick of wood and struck the hare on the nose. Ever since then, the hare's nose has been split, but the men still believe what he told them.
I think that's powerful, the as I die and dying live. That's great. And then the Bushmen, the Hottentots are part of the popular movie.
The gods,
The
must,
gods
be
must be
crazy.
crazy.
That's right.
And
That's
they're
right.
beautiful people.
Yes, wonderful people.
And also, I work in a hospital where there's many sick people, people ready to die, and so much effort is put into their well-being when they're so overburdened by pain and suffering and I mean, why is that?
Why do we keep people
Why
alive?
do you think? Yeah.
Well, that's a question that people have been asking for many hundreds of years. There's a little story in here from the Aesop Fable collection, way back, over 2,000 years ago. And it's very short, but it goes like this. There was an old woodcutter who was carrying a heavy load of wood a long way. Finally, he put down his load and called Death to come. And when Death arrived and asked why he called for him, the old man said, "Get you to take up my burden."
Wow.
So you see,
Sure.
there was an acceptance. There was this sense of that it was all right to let go.
It's better to
Yes,
let go.
yes. And you know, one day I was telling that story in a bookstore some years ago, and there was a little old lady. There was a small circle of people. There was a little old lady sitting in a chair, all crumpled over and looking very sad and forlorn. She hadn't spoken or engaged at all with anybody. And when I read that story, I saw her back straighten and her eyes light up, and she said, "Oh, that's what my mother was trying to tell me before she died.
Wow.
Now I understand."
Wow. A simple fable
She
like
got
that.
it. That's right. Just a very simple two
Wow.
sentences.
And then what other ways is this book used? Do you use this book?
The people use it? Well, I've had many letters from lots of people all over, and I've talked to a lot of them, and they say that they have read some of these stories, folk tales, and then for the first time they've been able to speak to a spouse or a parent or a loved one about the whole subject of death, and it's opened them up, and they feel so much lighter to be able to engage in this subject in a way that seems not frightening. And then I have another friend who every now and then she calls up and orders 3 or 4 more books. And the other day she called for some more, and she told me that she buys them and keeps them on hand because any time a friend of hers has a death in the family, she, instead of sending flowers, she'll send a copy of Some Folks Say as a way to comfort them and give
A
them
lasting
something.
gift.
Yes, it really, it does. It lasts a lifetime.
And like, there's a flood of information and feeling, and that's wonderful. And my favorite poem is the very last poem in the back. I Danced Despite Death, and it's from the Niger Delta, and it's kind of like a rope skipping, when you're
Little jingle.
Little jingle
Sort
when
of
you're
a
skipping
jingle.
rope on the
Right.
playground, and it goes, "I danced despite death, mother, I danced despite death. In my father's house is death, in my mother's house is death. I danced despite death, mother, I danced despite death. Whatever happens, I
accept it."
it.